my eyes got open to a completely different world. And even as a female athlete, I don't think, that would happen to us. And the stories you told, even about busking on the streets of Scotland, going into an international game, playing against Scotland, like, that stuff you just don't hear about, that you just think you're messing, those kind of stories that you just shouldn't happen to an international team. It shouldn't happen to a team, full stop.
House of Rugby Ireland, here on Joe, together with Guinness. Game changed.
Hello and welcome along to House of Rugby, here on Joe, together with Guinness. I'm Eimear Considine and I'm joined with Ian Madigan, and today we are delighted to mention, all the way from Brisbane, Australia, that Dan Leo, former Samoan international, is joining us today. Dan, you're very welcome to the show. What time is it there in Brisbane tonight?
Good question. Not too sure. I think it's somewhere between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning here now. So now used to these kind of nights and mornings. I've got 2 young kids, so life is per normal. Great to be here.
It's great to have you on the show, and hopefully spread the word on the fantastic documentary you put together that is Oceans Apart, which is available to watch on Amazon Prime. And where else can you watch it, actually, Dan? Anyone else who doesn't have Prime?
Actually, it's only on Amazon Prime in the UK and the US at the moment. It's available internationally on through Vimeo. We're hoping, and if any broadcasters are watching this and listening in, to get internationally released over the next couple of weeks. So the pickup's been amazing though in those zones. And if you do want to see it before it's available in your territory, please do look it up on Vimeo. It's a bit of an eye opener, but it's gone down really well so far.
It absolutely has. I think I was one of those suckers who signed up for Amazon Prime to try and watch it, and I ended up having to pay for it on Vimeo anyway, but now I have Amazon Prime, so that's a bonus, an extra bonus. But I suppose we'll get straight into it about, I suppose, your history and where you came from before we get into the movie. But you grew up in New Zealand with Samoan heritage, so tell us a bit about your background first.
Yeah, most, or not most, but a lot of us Samoans have got that sort of New Zealand or Australian heritage as well, because sort of being a second generation Samoan, my dad moved to New Zealand in the 80s for economic reasons. You can imagine in a small island, there's not many job opportunities, in New Zealand and Australia being our largest, closest neighbours, particularly in the 70s and 80s, there was a huge influx of Pacific Islanders to New Zealand as they were going through industrialisation, and they just needed bodies to fill those factory jobs, those low-skilled labour jobs. So my parents were part of that migration across. And again, sort of, the rugby migration now that we see through the world is probably an extension of that. We see ourselves as doing something similar that our parents did for us, and trying to move abroad and look for these financial opportunities to better our families. So I was lucky enough to come through the schooling system in New Zealand. Went to Auckland Grammar School with guys like Isa Nathewa and Ben Artinga and some guys, some really big names in the sport. I think that the school has produced the most All Blacks. Over 50 All Blacks, so it's esteemed in heritage, and there's a very proud tradition there. Ended up going over to Australia. Again, my parents moved for job reasons to Australia, and I followed them at the age of 18 and went through the Queens and Reds Academy. Played Samoa, came and played against Australia in 2005. Had an injury and gave me a call up. Michael Jones, who was an All Black legend, was the coach for Samoa at the time, and gave me a call. And basically, when you get a phone call from one of your boyhood heroes, you don't say no. And although it meant that I couldn't stay in Australia to play, the eligibility laws mean that if you want to play for one of the super teams there, you have to be eligible for the Wallabies. It was an opportunity to represent my dad's family, my family and my heritage and Samoa, and it was the rest sort of stemmed from there. Came over here and had a career in Europe. was over here for 15 years and have just returned to Brisbane. So, yeah, good times. So I had really enjoyed my career. Unfortunately, my international career was cut a bit short, before I probably would have liked it to have been. But, I was lucky to get 39 caps for Samoa, which is, pretty good achievement considering we only get about 3 or 4 games a year.
It absolutely is. And I suppose you finished up your rugby career prematurely, I suppose, in terms of rugby age and for finishing up. And that wasn't entirely by choice. Were you approached, or was it just cut short, without you having an input into that?
I think the international stuff took its toll, to be honest. In 2014, we were right on the brink of a players' strike. We had our walkthrough at Twickenham on the day of the game, and we were still uncertain whether we were actually going to turn up for the game at I think it was a 7 o'clock kickoff that evening.
Was this the game in Twickenham?
That late. Yeah, and I was really at the forefront of that those conversations as I wasn't a captain or a vice captain of the side at the moment, but I was in the senior players group, and basically I was nominated to front that dialogue with our union, with World Rugby, with the English, with the RFU, the RPA, and every stakeholder that was involved. So it was quite a testing period, especially when you're sort of building up to a big, an international match, against, in front of millions of people. So so that year in particular, because it wasn't just that week around that match, it was actually a whole year of those ongoing conversations, trying to get Samoan rugby to where we as players thought it deserved to be and where it needed to be. Was a long year, and probably just coming out the back of that, it sort of took my focus a bit off the playing side, and on the back of that, I sort of just wanted to step back and play amateur rugby and sort of rediscover the love for it. So that's what I did. I went back and played in the National One competition for Bishop Stortford. And really, that allowed me to focus on, on the drive that we needed, the organisation that we just set up, Pacific Rugby Players Welfare, without the demands of, having to look after rugby as a career as well. So, yeah.
Just Dan, on that 2014 game, obviously, in the lead up to that, and you can see this in the documentary, it came out that there was, potential corruption within the Samoan Rugby Union. Now, in fairness, it also covers in the documentary that over the last 4 years they've been audited and their accounts are all above board, which is great to see. But from what happened in 2014 and to what's happening in 2020, what changes do you think have come from then to now?
Well, nobody really wants to play for Samoa anymore, which is a real shame, and it's the hurdles. Things are getting harder and harder contractually. The clubs are making things a little bit more difficult now for players to go back and play for Samoa. There's a lot of pressure on those players not to go back and play for Samoa. But also when you look at the side, they've slipped from 7th to 17th in the rankings. Samoa hasn't played a game and since the World Cup. You hear all these stories of the corruption and the mismanagement. It doesn't create a good positive environment for players to want to go back. So again, we wanted to address all those things. We want to build a culture that attracts some of the wonderful players that we provide to the world game. But yeah, it's hard to say. As I say, we have to take that on face value. It was the Prime Minister of our country was actually the one that told us about that 4 years of clean accounts. But again, there's still this problem of high-level politicians using rugby as political ragdoll, I guess, in the Pacific Islands, which needs addressing. So, while there's positive strides being made forward. I guess in terms of definitely for us as Samoa and probably as Tonga as well, things have gone probably backwards in terms of our on-field performances and that desire for players to commit to playing for Samoa and Tonga. Fiji, thankfully, seem to be going from strength to strength. You would have played with guys like Semi Radradra, who have, they've got some real freaks, but also they've got a massive, a lot bigger of a player base, being a country of 1.2 million people. Tonga's a country of 100,000 people. So if three of their best players turn down the Tongan jersey, that has a massive impact on the Tongan national team. So we've got battles, but hopefully, with one of the key things we wanted to do with the documentary was raise the awareness around some of those, so that people can get alongside us and support us in those.
Yeah, certainly. Like just to give some background to the documentary, obviously I played over in Bristol for 3 years and was lucky enough to play with a lot of Samoan internationals while I was there, and I got to see firsthand the difficulties they had with pairing up, playing for their club and trying to play internationally. Just to explain to people out there, you've guys who, for example, go to play in a World Cup. And if you were playing for Ireland or England in the World Cup, you'd have a minimum of 4 weeks after the competition ended. The Samoan guys might have had 1 week, and because they're deemed to be a Tier 2 nation, they'd be straight back in. And then on top of that, then you've issues with guys getting money back for flights, not getting match fees. And, obviously I was coming from the Irish setup, which is brilliant. Everyone's kind of looked after. And I couldn't believe that, a team that on our day could beat us has to deal with these kind of external factors.
Yeah, there's lots of challenges playing, not just for the Pacific Islands, but I guess for Tier 2 and 3 nations. I think that that run into tests that you mentioned, only having at times 3 or 4 days to come together and try and get your combinations, good enough to test some of the bigger nations who might have had 3 or 4 2-week camps, is very difficult. And it's not, the player pools there. We know how many talented Pacific Island players there are around the world for us to pick. But you can be bringing the best team, of players together, and if you haven't got time and resources to put into developing that, and also, the team culture, it's going to be difficult to get those results. So that's probably one of the issues. There's so many issues affecting Pacific Island rugby, particularly due to our lack of resources. And a club like Bristol, you would have seen, as you said, you would have seen those players struggling to at times to go away and get that cooperation between the club and the Pacific Island unions, and that's with Pat Lam as your coach, and he's probably a lot more sympathetic to a lot of the clubs and coaches that are out there. God forbid when I was playing, I'd ever turn back from playing for Samoa injured. And that's at the very top, the very pinnacle of the game. You go down a couple of levels where we're having to draw a lot of our players from the second division of France, for instance. It gets even harder and harder to have those conversations to get clubs to release you when you know that you're basically going to have to forfeit your month's salary while you're away. So if it's difficult for the players at the top at Bristol, it's even more so for the case for those guys that are below the top divisions.
Dan, I think one of the main issues that I noticed in the documentary was the issue with player retention and Islanders not playing with their native islands. And I think it opened up my eyes to both sides of the argument, the reasons why they're not playing because the funding isn't there, and that I saw the poverty. And, in the documentary, you see the need for the players to go abroad and to make the big money so that they can send home. So it is, the players are in a very difficult situation.
Yeah, they are, and firstly, it's probably worth mentioning that we don't actually want that situation can't change where players our Pacific Island players are able to represent other nations, because they do that very proudly. Even in Ireland, there with guys like Bandiaki and Sene Naupu in the women's game represent. They consider themselves Irish Pacific Islanders, and that's reflective of the world, society today. And unfortunately, the eligibility laws are one of those areas that we really need rugby to look at, because those they don't currently probably reflect the reality of not just society but economic migration, which we spoke a bit about off camera. And the fact that guys are in a lot of cases going across and qualifying for these nations, to look after people and look after their families, look after their villages, and extreme examples. And we'd like to, and those are actually really valuable things that should be celebrated. It's a great honour for those players to be able to do that. But it's just a shame that it comes at the detriment sometimes, particularly at, once they don't, they're no longer wanted by those tier one nations, that they can't come back and give back to the Pacific Islands if they've still got something to give.
Yeah, just on how reliant World Rugby is on the Pacific Island players. Like for me personally, coming through the Leinster system, I had Easton Nasiwa there who mentored me and was probably the most influential player I've had throughout my career. He taught me so much, both on the field and off the field, and even in my time in Bristol, like learning off guys like Tusi Pisi. One of the things I thought of, like in Ireland, if you break through and you play professionally for Ireland, your mini rugby team will get rewarded. Will get a financial reward for the time that they've invested in you, getting it up to that level. Even though it might only be up to the age of 10, 11 or 12, they'll still get rewarded when you get your first international cap. I wonder, is something that can be brought in that within a contract, even if it's something as small as 1% of the contract, has to go back to the native, or to the country where that player originated from, like to see how far that money could potentially go in the islands. Like, do you see that as a potential route, or is it something that you've looked at previously?
Yeah. No, definitely. I think something like that has been mooted. It actually might even already be in effect. I know that one of the players who came to the Premiership last season was actually in that sort of situation where the club actually had to pay the Fijian Rugby Union in this instance a development fee for every year that had come through the academy before he was 24, I think. After the age of 24, there was no if they contracted him after the age of 24, they didn't have to pay anything. And so again, what happened in that situation was the club I think he was 22 and a half at the time. They just said, well, we won't contract him until he's 24, so they put it off signing him for a year and a half. So again, it takes clubs, governing bodies, organisation, to really buy into that sort of system. And actually, what we need as Pacific Islanders is people to start doing things because they're the right things to do, not because they have to do them, not because there's loopholes that they can get around, and getting players cheaply from the islands if they do this, and this. No, it's we need because they're not really sometimes within the values of the game. So I understand rugby's a business these days, and clubs and some of those tier one nations are looking out for them, for their in terms of their investors and the people that they represent. But problem being is that we don't really have a voice, or a strong enough voice as the Pacific Islands to make stands, where they're needed. But I think a key thing in that, Ian, what you've suggested is getting the right people around the conversation table. And I think, what we've seen since the game went professional is that actually, some of the decisions at that top table probably haven't been to our benefit of actually, contributing to our detriment of our nations. And we need that to change. We need there to be a bit of a shift, I think, in terms of the way that the whole decision-making process, that whole World Rugby Council, which we address in the film, is being operated. Because the fact that you've got, unless you have influence on that at that top of the game around that executive committee and the the voting table, it's very, very difficult to to instigate these kind of the policies in the game that would protect not just Pacific Islands, but those other developing nations. I read the other day that I think it was Iran, Laos, and Burkina Faso or something have been admitted as full member unions to the World Rugby, and that was emblazoned all over the website and all over the news. This great news, but in actual fact, full member unions, they don't even have any votes. So it's all just, for me, there's a lot of smoke screens, a lot of false, promotion from the governing body to the point where, we make it look like this inclusive game. But actually there's a lot of work for us to do, collectively, for us to get to that position where we are aligned with the values that we preach to the world. So sorry, I've gone off a massive rant there. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, it does.
Lots of work to do.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. There probably is some sort of system in place, but it's from the sounds of things, clubs are bending the rules and trying to work a way around it. It's not implemented as well as it could. It's a good idea, but it's only as good as the implementation of the rules and making sure that the money is getting sent back and being used appropriately.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same with the eligibility laws. The changing of the 3 years qualification to 5 years. But what we're seeing, in a lot of cases, is just the way that is manifesting itself is that clubs, countries are just going and picking guys younger from the islands. So instead of going and signing them at 15 or 16, Rupeni Faufau's son now is being approached at 11 or 12. And so again, it's just in theory, a lot of these regulations, these decisions are being made probably with hopefully with best interests at heart, but in actual, the practicality of that is sometimes very different, and that's why we need the right people around that got people that are actually working on the ground. I think there's an issue, Ian, at the moment with rugby and world rugby in particular, that they don't embrace independent organisations, whether that be players' bodies or anyone really, consultants. There's a bit of a closed shop. In my opinion, that's holding us back. If we want to get the right answers, we need to open that process up and get people, and groups around the table that are, there for the right reasons, not just because they're on World Rugby's payroll or under that that funding from that governing body. So, again, lots of issues, mate. Lots of issues.
It seems that your hands were tied with World Rugby, and that there seemed to have been no budge with them. Even watching the documentary and seeing when you suggested about a one vote, one country, he almost laughed in your face. Like, just the disrespect of those tier 2 and tier 3 countries, I just couldn't get over personally. But I suppose that was one of the challenges that you faced. But what other types of challenges did you face in the process of making the documentary?
Oh, geez, yeah. I think it was important making the film that we didn't just try and point the finger at external organisations like World Rugby, like the Tier 1 nations. We had to really be willing to have a hard look at ourselves and the cultural norms that probably hold us back as well. So this whole respect culture that's prevalent in the islands is great. It makes us who we are as Pacific Islanders. It makes us great rugby players, great team players. I've been in France where the French go absolutely ballistic because they don't like the fact that the English guys are asking loads of questions at the team meetings. The Islanders will just sit there and when the coach says jump, they ask how high, and it's the way that we've been brought up. But sometimes that can hold us back as well. So we needed to look at that, and that had me sort of talking to my father, and questioning even some of those highest politicians in our country, which was really difficult, as a Samoan, and I think through making the film, it was hard to get that balance, because I think knowing that we sort of targeted for an international audience. People probably expected me as the presenter to go in there, asking those tough questions. But as a Pacific Islander, we just, it's got to be done respectfully as well. So it's, trying to find that balance was difficult. Then there was, just the practical challenges of, having no budget to make this film on. We wanted to make sure it was the Pacific Island story told by Pacific Islanders, and we didn't want any corruption of that story, really. And sometimes when you bring on board sponsors and broadcasters before you've made a film, they have a lot of say in the editing process, and we didn't want that to be the case. We wanted the story to maintain its integrity. So we filmed the whole thing on £10,000, which included 2 trips for 2 of us down to the Pacific. So basically, there were so many challenges, so many hurdles. Even within that process, one of the signatories on the millions of dollars that went missing from the Samoan Rugby Union was actually a relative of mine. So just going through that whole process of with my father, of actually him questioning why it had to be me, fronting this campaign, when it was probably going to bring, not just our family, but the whole village into disrepute. But, again, you go through those questions, and you just have to think to yourself, well, if not me, who else? Do we wait around another 30 years for World Rugby and the Tier 1 nations to do what's right, and or are we actually part of that process? And that was the conclusion we came to. Was actually no, if we're ever going to get anywhere with all the issues, we need to educate people and raise the awareness as to what those issues are. And some of them are, we believe there's quick fixes and they're solvable. Others, like the cultural issues, that have been ingrained over thousands of years, are probably a bit more difficult. But we've got to try, and we've got to start somewhere. Yeah,
it was a fantastic achievement putting together that documentary on that budget. You'd have no idea it was run on such a shoestring. But another big point that comes up in that documentary, and it's something that I was unaware of as a player, that when a host nation has, like whether it's England or Ireland, has Samoa, Fiji or Tonga playing against them, be it in the Aviva or Twickenham, the home nation gets 100% of the gate. Now, that's fine, providing they're going back and playing in Samoa, Fiji or Tonga, and it's profitable for you guys. Now, it also comes out that it's currently not profitable because of ticket sales and flights that you'd have to cover for the teams travelling over. Now, there's 2 sides to it, because with the IRFU, the men's national team fund a lot of what comes below it, be it the men's provincial teams, the women's provincial teams, the women's national teams, and the sevens. And if they were to say, right, well, if we're going to give 10% of the gate to Samoa, Fiji or Tonga, the money's got to come from somewhere else. But one of the thoughts that I had was that they have to give the money, whether it's 5%, if they're not going to do a return fixture. What kind of conversations have been had around that space?
Yeah, it's something that's always, I was surprised, in a lot of the reaction since we released the film 2 weeks ago in the UK. it's absolutely overwhelming. The support we've got, but B, the fact that very, very few people knew about that sharing of funding, or the lack of sharing, I guess.
Yeah.
That happens at the top of the game. To the point where we know it as Samoan players, because we're sort of when you leave after playing in front of 70, 80,000 people sometimes, and you've got you're actually at a loss, because the £250 that we did get paid for the match is probably gone straight away in your wife's hotel bills. So you're actually at a loss playing in front of and that's before broadcast rights and all that come into it as well. So yeah, it did shock me that people didn't. And again, this is why it was so important that we made the film, just to lift the lid on some of these skeletons in World Rugby's closet, I suppose, and not just World Rugby. They're probably not ultimately. As I spoke to Brett Gosper about that in the film, the CEO of World Rugby, they don't see themselves as responsible. They say that's the contractual rights of those individual unions as sovereign unions. So yeah, it does feel a little bit sometimes like the buck's being passed, and then, as you say, the unions themselves will say, look, we've got all these overheads, in the RFU's instance, that case, with COVID, they've just had to release, a heck of a lot of employees, which is horrible for those people, to have had to have lost their jobs. So for us then to be, chucking on, as you say, an extra, saying, oh, look, we want a fair split of what, what's being earned as well is tough. I understand that. But it's we had a player in Samoa when Samoa played England in 2017 who was who wasn't contracted. He was living in Samoa, and he was a farmer, and he was probably earning on average £2 a day. That was and actually the players, the Samoan players, a lot of them gave we managed to sort of negotiate up from £250 to 400, I think what it is now, £400 to play against the Tier 1 nation. The Samoan players get, and a lot of players actually donated that match fee to him, so that he was actually going to be going home with something for for a 6 week the 6 weeks that he'd been away from home. He was going back, and so that he wouldn't have been out of pocket. And for me, it's just wrong. The fact that such a disparity does exist. I've actually written to all of the home unions to ask that they would consider, as small as a 5 or 10% share of the ticket sales when they're hosting a Tier 2 nation. That was positively received in the first instance, but it's sort of gone cold since COVID struck. That conversation's gone dead a bit. Again, it's probably understandable, but hopefully once things return back to normal, we can get some sensible conversations started again around that. And one of the key things that came out of the whole journey of making this documentary is a lot of was the fact that these Tier 1 nations do have so much power. And I think as players and fans, we always like to think of World Rugby being that overarching organisation that's in control of the game and all these decisions. But actually what I learned was that it's actually those Tier 1 nations that are pulling all the strings. So we have to lobby them. They hold all the power. If we're going to get anywhere, it's them that we need to be lobbying, and that's where I guess the public can come on board by writing to their unions and hopefully putting pressure on them to do the right thing, not just by their own players and their own systems that they're developing, but by those smaller visiting nations who don't have any other way to make any income apart from at the gate.
Yeah, I think a key line in the documentary is there's no doubt professional rugby now is a business, and we've seen that in recent years with CVC's money coming into Europe, and it's just the way the game has gone. But at the same time, you can't have it both ways. You can't be pushing onto the public, the core values of rugby that World Rugby are pushing all the time. Same, with all the home unions. you can't have both sides of that and then not have fairness with the Pacific Island nations. That's what I took from it. I'm not sure about you, Eimear, but
Yeah, like I just think we just don't know about this inequality. I think that's the one thing that struck with me, was that it just, my eyes got open to a completely different world. And even as a female athlete, I don't think, we'd get it, that would happen to us. The stories you told, even about busking on the streets of Scotland, going into an international game, playing against Scotland, like that stuff you just don't hear about, that you just think you're messing, those kind of stories that you just shouldn't happen to an international team. It shouldn't happen to a team full stop, let alone an international team who's paying for their own dinner.
Yeah, and that's the overwhelming response from the messages. I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of messages of support since the film went live. And I guess 2020 being sort of the hopefully being going to be remembered as a year where those financial obligations of organisations does sort of clash with the moral obligations as well. I've had there's been a lot of heartwarming messages particularly from the public. In one instance, it was the international, one of the international pitchside doctors that works at Twickenham messaged me and said, look, he watched the film, he thinks it's wrong that that himself as a doctor, pitchside doctor, should be getting paid more than some of the players that he's treating, and he's offered to pledge his match earnings to Pacific Rugby players' welfare until there is a bit more of an even playing field. That's one example of, as I said, hundreds of messages, and I think the overwhelming response from the public is that they do want to see those values being upheld and maintained, and that they are important to us. It's not just about growing the sport as big and wide as we can at any cost. We do have to abide. There is a way that we do things as the rugby family, and that it's actually those values are equality and fairness and looking after the little guy, and that's hopefully we can get realigned with those, because it is a bit of a blemish on the game. And actually, I think if we can be true to those values, and that's the game will grow organically, because we're pushing it out and we've got huge marketing campaigns but actually because other countries that don't play will look at it and say, that's a great game, look how they look after people, we want that, we want to play that game because it's special. It's not just we're trying to create another football here. It's it means more than that. So and that's over to us as the public, as the players, as myself, to really hold those people in power to account there, and make sure that they are developing and taking this game to where we all want it to go.
Ian, did you as a player know a lot of this going on? From playing with a lot of Islanders throughout your career, did you know there was these inequalities going on, or did the documentary highlight it even more?
Definitely not an issue when I was in Ireland. Even though I was close with Issa, I wouldn't have known, the difficulties he would have had. I know that Issa played when he was very young and then was ruled out for playing for New Zealand off the back of it, which is almost the opposite to what's happening now. You have someone like Charles Piutau who's played for New Zealand but would now like to have the opportunity to play with his brother in Tonga. But it was when I was in Bristol that I saw firsthand, guys not getting paid for tours, guys having to pay for their own flights to go back to Samoa to represent Samoa for camps. And it was only then really that I felt very passionate about it, because I see firsthand, what these guys are going through, how passionate they are to play for their country, and through no fault of their own, that decision to play for their country is being made extremely difficult. It's they could be putting their family under massive financial pressure. They could be putting their next contract at risk because they could have a falling out with the head coach. So there really is, there's big things at play here. It's not just a simple decision to make.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, guys. If we want this, and I think, the amount of players, we the Pacific Islands provide 30% of the players now at the World Cups with 3 teams that we provide. It's just and we want that to continue. I think it's the incentive to invest into the islands is only going to come back, be paid, returned tenfold, I believe, because we do need more countries that can potentially win the World Cup. I think realistically, when you look at the draw every 4 years, that one of probably realistically only 6, maybe 5 or 6 teams can actually win it in any year, and we need to expand that, to the point where all 16 or 20 teams, at a World Cup can have a realistic potential of winning that, and that's just not the case now. But let's I'm positive that with the right people behind us, as I said earlier, and a shift in World Rugby's mentality, where they do get those right people around the table, that this situation can change, and that in 20 years' time, we're not still just turning up to World Cups and seeing South Africa, New Zealand, England, and and maybe Ireland or or one other with a chance. Actually, the Pacific Islands can actually really live and realize our potential of being semi-finalists, being finalists. Why not even winning a World Cup? I'd love to see that in my lifetime. But at the moment, with the way the system is, it's just not a reality.
Well, Dan, I think we could have talked to you all day about this. It was so interesting. We could stay here, honestly, all day long, but we don't have it. But for any Irish rugby fans that haven't seen the documentary yet, I would absolutely highly recommend it. Myself and Ian both would. And it's a great insight into the Pacific Islands rugby, and it's called Oceans Apart, and it's available on Vimeo at the moment and hopefully on Amazon Prime very soon in our region. So before we go, Dan, we gave you a little heads up about a few items that we got you to gather in your house to take part in our House of Rugby challenge today. So the 3 things we asked you to come up with were a piece of rugby memorabilia, a jersey you've swapped and held on to, and something non-rugby related. So hopefully there's a good story behind all 3 of these treasures. We'll start off with the first one.
There's a good story in the fact that I've only got one of those 3 because I've just moved back to Brisbane, and the rest, all of my stuff's in shipping at the moment. Currently just got what I brought over in my suitcase. But one of those being, the most important thing, to me, it was, most people, I've seen a few people bring their first jersey on, or, one that was important that they swapped. I've actually got my, this was the last jersey that I got for playing for Samoa. And the reason why it's so important to me is for those reasons that we spoke about. It was, it was the game that we're about to strike. It was my last game. I basically thrown my head through the glass at that stage. And basically before, very rarely do you go into a game knowing that it's going to be your last game. But I knew that was going to be my last for the the stand that we were making. I've kept that jersey. I keep it very close to me, and whenever I'm lacking motivation to push through and for this journey and this cause that I'm fighting for, I look at it and it reminds me of the important things on that jersey of what I've basically poured my life into this cause now. So that's the story behind that, and probably a bit different than some of the ones that you might have heard on there. But yes, apologize. I haven't got much else though. As I said, I've literally come back to Australia 3 months ago. Returned back from the UK with my young family. Had to do 2 weeks of quarantine with them in Sydney. So basically just loaded up our suitcases with as many toys and stuff to get through that quarantine period as we could. So I'm a little bit light on the ground in terms of clothing myself and memorabilia, but loving life back here in Queensland, where there's at least there's no COVID.
At least there's sunshine as well, and you managed to time the documentary around your 2 weeks quarantine. So I'm sure you were doing interviews all those 2 weeks.
Yeah, job interviews as well. I've just started working full time with in the special needs sector back here in Australia, looking after a one-on-one with a kid with autism. So different challenge. This the work that I do with Pacific Rugby Players Welfare has and always, it's important that it is voluntary. We don't want people thinking that we're doing this for the wrong reasons, particularly in our country where, a lot of people are involved in rugby for the wrong reasons. So yeah, I'm enjoying life back here. It's it throws up its challenges, but really appreciate you guys having me on here and just being able to, talk about some of these issues which, hopefully we can impact and change.
Absolutely. Well, Dan, it has been an absolute pleasure from the two of us to have you on, and best of luck with the documentary, and I hope loads more people see it.
There's big support for you guys from all the players here in Ireland.
Really appreciate that. Hopefully we'll get Ireland over to the Pacific Islands sometime soon as well, eh?
Hopefully.
COVID.
Thanks, Dan.
House of Rugby Ireland, here on Joe, together with Guinness. Game changed.
For the Guinness House of Rugby Hall of Fame, this week we asked you on our Twitter and Facebook to tell us your favourite Pacific Islander. Gregor Galway said Namanji Nandolo, while Len Carmody suggested Brian Lima for his nickname, the chiropractor, and reminded us he was signed by Munster on a short-term contract but never got to wear the famous red jersey after. Lloyd Warren said, my favourite ever is Junior Paramore. Giving anything less than 100% was never in his mindset and always with a smile. A true Gloucester rugby legend. Congratulations, Lloyd, and welcome to the Guinness House of Rugby Hall of Fame. Ian, we're not going to dwell too much on the game at the weekend, but we must mention the win over Georgia. I suppose some really good Ulster performances, the one positive we can take out of that game. Yeah,
certainly. I thought Billy went really well for the time he was on, and Stu McCluskey showed, what he can do and what he's been doing for the last few years for Ulster. So hopefully, they get goals again this week. I'm not sure if Billy's fit, but Stu certainly looked really good out there, and in the pack I thought Hendy had a good game, and so did Rob Herring. So there was still positive to take from that game. If you look at that first half, we played some good rugby. We moved the ball well. We could have scored just before half time, which could have very much changed the psychology of that second half. But at the same time, there's no getting away. Like that second half performance was below the standards that they set. But yeah, I suppose, what did you think of it?
I suppose, yeah, it's the second half, isn't it? It's the 3 points and that's it in the second half, against a team like Georgia where, I know our scrum was struggling in the first half and Cian Healy came on then and rectified that, but still 3 points. I think they were disappointed. You could see it in their demeanour after the game that they were disappointed. It was almost like they'd lost the game, and their standards are higher than that. I think as an Irish team, as an Irish squad going out against Georgia, fair play to Georgia for how they played and how they stood up to the game and faced the game. But the Irish lads won't be happy with that and weren't happy with that performance. I think last week you mentioned Stuart McCluskey and I said Shane Daly, and both guys got the call up. So our predictions have been right so far anyway. So at least we're happy with those ones. I thought Stuart was excellent. Really great to see him play so well. And, he was great in attack. He created so many opportunities with both his foot and with his ball in hand, and his carrying abilities was really, really good. And I was delighted to see Shane Daly come on and get his first cap. And he's a really strong future. I thought it was nice he came on for Earlsey as well. I'm sure he's someone he grew up, looking up to and wanting to be. So really, really proud moment for him.
Yeah, I thought Shane looked really sharp, even in the few minutes he got. A nice chip up the touchline. It was unlucky it didn't work out, but I think you could see with Ireland at the weekend, they did have a clear kind of kick strategy as attacking kicks, grubbers, chips. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I think they got criticised last weekend for not kicking so too often. Maybe that was in the back of their minds going into that game, but they probably didn't need to kick as much as they did, against a team like Georgia. Build the phases, keep possession, get some momentum, get some strong carries, and eventually you will spot gaps in their defence. You will open them up, or you'll catch them out wide, or they'll give away a penalty after a few phases. So I suppose the decision making in that probably could have been better, but maybe it was in their minds for the game at the weekend. That they kicked too sparingly, and maybe this weekend they kicked too often. And I suppose it's to find that balance and I suppose every team is different. Like against England, you're going to have to kick for territory, and that's the most important thing there. Whereas against Georgia, we need the ball in hand, and I think it was our decision making at the weekend that we probably lacked a bit of, really. I think just looking even on Twitter, there was quite a lot of negative comments. They were getting a lot of stick for how they played and the way that they played, and think it's very easy for people sitting at home, us even here, sitting here in this chair, chatting about it and chatting about their decisions. But it's a completely different ballgame when you're on the field. And I suppose that's just the nature of being a professional rugby player, is that you have to take the good with the bad. And have you ever experienced any of the bad negativity? I know the good stuff you don't really mind, but what about the negative ones?
Yeah, certainly. I suppose for me, in the earlier years when I was trying to break into the Leinster side, if there's a nice article written about you, you're going to read it. You know, if there's nice tweet sent your way, you're going to read it, because you're going to have a friend saying it to you. Your dad might say, "Oh, did you see that nice article that was written about you?" And you'll read it. But it's dangerous going down that route, because if you're going to read the good stuff, you're going to end up reading the bad stuff. And it was really Enda McNulty that said to me, "Here, look, unless it's having a really positive effect on you, because the table will turn, you know, maybe just cut it out."
Yeah.
And, you know, I know players who be on the supporters boards after games and reading the most toxic stuff being written. People directly sending them messages on Twitter. And like the reality is, if those people who are sending those tweets met whatever the player is in person, you'd be guaranteed to be nice as pie and to be complimentary. But because they're behind their phone and they're letting rip, and you know they're probably trying to get a reaction off their friends in WhatsApp groups or whatever it might be, very nasty stuff is said. And it is it's something that's probably crept into the game over the last few years. And you know, I'm sure you've experienced it yourself over the last few seasons.
Yeah, like I suppose we're not in the spotlight as much as you guys would be, and but yeah, you experience it, and like that, you look for it, even though everyone tells you not to look for the negative comments, and everyone tells you not to look at, like you said, they're not going to say that stuff to your face. But I suppose with the joy and the good and the bad thing with social media is that you get at it, you get you're tagged in something, which means you automatically get a notification, and you're then in a thread of tweets, and you're notified every single time someone says something. And I honestly wouldn't have had that many negative comments really only this week, really, around the women's coverage of the game with TG Carr last weekend, and a few articles came out since with World Rugby. And it's just so funny to see different people's takes on it, and not everyone is going to agree with the fact that it was an all-female commentary team. It's just funny though, and I think I can see the funny side of it, and I can see, look, not everyone's going to be happy with it. Some people wouldn't be happy if you told them the sky was blue. Some people will argue with everything, or go against or be opposed to everything. So look, you have to take the good with the bad, and there's plenty of good to take. And my mother has all those articles, printed out from the papers. She has every single one of them torn off in a drawer somewhere. And I suppose they're the good ones that you'll remember. And you have to take the good with the bad.
Yeah, and look, through you, I'm aware of that reaction, and it's really disappointing. We're looking to grow the game. We're trying to get more female rugby players playing the game or supporting it. I know from watching the TG4 coverage, Anna's far more into it if you're on, or it's the all female coverage. And I think you see with this, the soccer in the UK, it's the way the game is going, and we've got to be more open-minded. Even bringing in female referees, there's no reason why they can't be just as good or better than the men. And I think people have to step back and realise, not be as closed-minded, and this is the way forward.
I think it is, and I even seen there was a touchline judge as a female yesterday, and Joy Neville reffing games, really, really high standard quality international games, and it's just, no one even bats an eyelid anymore, and that's the really good thing, is that I think it's just everyone's so used to it, and they're good at what they do. It's not because they're a male or they're a female, it's because they're genuinely good at what they do, and they deserve to be there. They're not there because they're a male, they're not there because they're female, it's because they're the best person for the job, and I think that's the most important thing, no matter who they are. But I suppose around media stuff and around protocol, I learned quite a bit on how to manage it, and especially from looking up to older players. I remember in the 2017 World Cup, when it was home, there was a lot of focus on us, and obviously being in Dublin and there was quite a lot of hype around the game and around the World Cup itself, and a lot of the older players would have deleted their social media and deleted their Twitter, and just I couldn't understand it really. But from being in the game a while now, I understand why, and I understand that there's a lot of positive stuff, but the negative stuff as well, and it's hard to focus on. And we would have media protocols in place at the moment where, just with international games, that we wouldn't we're not supposed to be on social media, like liking photos. Like obviously we can go on it, we can look on it, whatever, but just not interacting on social media, whether it's comments or likes or, responding to posts and that. We shouldn't be doing that from the day before until the day after. And I suppose it's a way to protect us as players that, let's say so-and-so hasn't got a good game or hasn't played very well. Well, you can't have your man down the road saying, well, she was tweeting there last night at 11 o'clock when she should have been asleep. So I suppose it's a protection way for us. But would you have any stipulations in relation to your social media at the moment?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that. Like, and there is that aspect. A player who's disappointed after a loss and has a hot-headed reaction about a ref or something like that. The club or the union doesn't want that to happen, so they don't want to take it away. And we had similar bans when I was in Leinster, but Bristol had a very different view to it. Same in Bordeaux, and even Ulster now have a different view. We can post right up to games and post after games, and they want interaction with the supporters. They want guys thanking the supporters for coming, congratulating guys on first caps, and getting that interaction going, making the supporters feel like they're more part of the experience the whole day. And I think waiting a full day after a game, the moment has sometimes passed. So there is definitely positives to be taken between by having these bans, but also there's opportunities there to grow the game and interact with supporters. Absolutely.
I suppose looking forward, we went way off task there, but looking forward to the men's game at the weekend. They still have Scotland to play. It's for a third, fourth playoff. I suppose not the place that they want to be, but look, Scotland are the one that we face at the weekend. And do you think they'll have many changes? Will we go out to win this game, or will we go out to just, blood those new players again?
Yeah, I think they'll pick players who have been playing well. They'll reward the guys who've performed, in the last kind of 4, 5, 6 weeks. But there will be a big focus on winning this game. It is an important one. Scotland are a side that have been building over the last few weeks, and they'll fancy themselves to come. And I think we saw in the Six Nations last year that they ran Ireland really close, and we were potentially a bit lucky to come away with a win there. So I expect that would be a really good game. But I think Andy Farrell will pick his best available 15 and 23.
That's the thing as well. It's the best available, and there's a lot of injuries in the squad at the moment. There really is. So the best squad available isn't necessarily the best squad we have in Ireland. I suppose that there's a lot of injuries in the forwards as well, and we probably saw that last weekend with, the penalties that were given away, and they've really, there was a lot of talk about set piece in the last few games coming up to that, and it wasn't really any better last week. So I suppose take little things, and maybe the focus might be on set piece next weekend. But I would like to see guys rewarded, and I think Andy Farrell is doing that. He's rewarding the guys that have been playing well, both at provinces, by selecting them in the first place and bringing them in. And like we see, Eric O'Sullivan came into the Irish squad again this week and last week, being rewarded for playing well. And I think that's really good to see, that there is an opportunity. If you're pushing in your club, and if you're pushing those players that are starting in training, that you finally will get your opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's been great to see Eric getting called up. He's a guy who was playing AIL up to a few seasons ago, has been one of Ulster's most consistent performers over the last 2 or 3 seasons, and he's fully deserved of that call up. I think we were all a bit disappointed that he didn't make the 23 last weekend, but I know going into that Irish setup, there's a lot of detail to learn, and maybe they didn't want to do him unjust, and you don't want to rush a guy in and then him not be at his best, and that could be his first chance gone. So, but no, Eric is definitely a guy who's going to keep knocking on the door, and there's no doubt he'll be in for his first cap soon.
Absolutely, and hopefully he will be. So looking ahead to the weekend, France are in a little bit of a sticky situation in relation to their squad rotation. So the rules that they agreed with the top 14 means players can only play 3 games. So facing England, that's not an ideal situation for them.
No, certainly not. But I think we saw they rotated a lot against Italy at the weekend, and the guys who were coming in, some were fantastic. Like the likes of Teddy Thomas on the wing, he looked like he was out there playing tag rugby the way he was playing with the Italian defenders. He's just a phenomenal winger. Anytime you get him the ball, it looks like something's going to happen. But I think regardless of what 23 France put out against England, that's going to be a really, really good game. They've had some great matches over the last few years, and the French have real confidence about themselves at the moment, and they'll be going over there thinking that they can win.
Yeah. If you're going to put your money on it, who would you put it on?
I still think England at home. I think they've just figured out a game plan that's winning rugby for them. And for me, looking at that, a lot has to go wrong for England not to win at the moment. It's just such high percentage rugby. It's not particularly good to watch, but they play a very accurate kicking game. They've lots of good ball players. If you look at their backline, it's nearly all centres and out halves between Farrell, Slade, Daly. Even the wingers have previously played at full back or in the centre. So they're able to move the ball, and they're all incredibly good kickers. And then on top of that, you've obviously got a fantastic pack who can play that power game and keep them on the front foot. So I think England will edge it, but I think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, absolutely. Now there was there was only 2 Guinness Pro 14 games at the weekend. Obviously the Leinster and the Connacht game getting postponed due to COVID cases. But you played last night. How are you after? How's the body after it?
Yeah, not too bad. Bit stiff. We travelled over in the day, so they're long old days. You're up at 7 o'clock and you're not back home till 1 or 2. Yeah, it's only tough if you have to work the following day. So no, I'm not complaining. We've a few days off now, which is great. So it's been a kind of long enough run of games. I think we've been 8 in a row in the league.
Yeah, you have to be happy with that.
Yeah, it's been great start. Really enjoyable. It's great to get a run of wins. There's nothing like wins to keep the squad happy, and we feel like we're building something special up north. And
absolutely, it was close last night at some stage. I know you ended up winning by a significant amount, 43-14. But at one stage, if I learned anything from the game last night, it was always chase down the conversion, because hit the post and then he was offside, a mile offside in fairness. But had he been a metre back, that was a try. It was 19-19 and the game was completely turned.
It was one of those moments where I thought he'd scored and I was going, how have we let these guys back into the game? And it was through our own mistakes that we'd let them back in. But yeah, I was standing in behind the post and the ball was coming in and I shouted, right post. But it took such a bizarre bounce off the post there.
It went right out to the wing.
Spot, yeah. And surely enough, he scored it. But ironically enough, it was actually our video analyst who spotted it, that the winger was offside. And none of us had known. He wouldn't have known to check it. So our captain went up and said it to the ref, look, would you mind just making sure he's onside? And then surely enough, they checked it.
Yeah.
But, at 19-all, it's a very different game as opposed to going up 40 metres, winning a penalty, and then we scored quite quickly after that. And then, the game was put to bed and we were able to pull away. But no, look, we know that we played well for periods of the game. The opening 20 minutes was really good, and we turned it on for probably the last quarter. But we're also aware for the European Cup in 2 weeks' time that we're going to have to string it together for 80 minutes to beat the likes of Toulouse and Gloucester in our first 2 games.
Absolutely, not an easy start for you. I turned over the Munster game at halftime. They had the bonus point win. I know you probably didn't see it. You were playing at the exact same time. But again, Munster, another province with 8 out of 8. Leinster the same, Ulster the same. It's really looking positive for the Irish provinces. Or is the Pro 14 just got to a stage where we're way ahead of the rest of them?
Yeah, I think it will make for a very exciting Interpro series at Christmas. We've got 5 big games coming up between the 2 European and the 3 Interpro games. So we'll find out, who's really 8 from 8 and still unbeaten come the new year. But no, look, it was a very good performance from Munster again. It was great to see JJ getting man of the match.
Yeah.
He's a quality player and a guy who'd be looking to really nail down that 10 slot going into Europe.
Yeah.
And, no doubt he's the guy to take them forward.
Do you think that, given the Autumn Nations Cup, will those internationals be rested quite a bit then for those Interpros? Will they just be focused on Six Nations coming in? Because it has been since COVID, since we've returned back from COVID, it's been quite a string of games between, Pro 14 finals and depending on who you are, you could have had 10 or 11 games at this stage.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be a tricky one now for the provincial sides who haven't had the internationals for, let's say, 6 weeks. Yeah. You're going straight into a European game. If you've got a guy who's been playing well provincially, obviously you've got international guys coming back. You're going to be picking some of them, but you might necessarily be picking all of them.
Yeah.
You've got to still have core guys who've, your game plan's evolving week to week. You can't just suddenly bring in 15 new guys into your starting team because it's going to end up too disjointed. So you might see guys who've been playing internationally coming off the bench initially in that first game, and then as they integrate and get another training week under their belt, I'm sure they'll be in to start, the second European game. And then I think the way we'll probably see it over the Interpro series in the 3 games, you'll probably have one player starting one, subbing one, and maybe getting a week off for the other. But I think all the players in Ireland are hungry to be involved in those games and you know, want to compete like, you know, the old Irish trials, and that's where you can put your hand up for Irish selection. Absolutely.
Well, cheers to everybody for watching and listening today. It has been a pleasure to have Dan Leo on. He was a fantastic guest. Cheers to everybody for watching and for listening. Big thank you to producer Pat, Paul, Dermot, Ian, Anthony, and everyone who helped get together in this show. This has been House of Rugby Ireland here on Joe, together with Guinness. Slán go fóill.
House of Rugby Ireland here on Joe, together with Guinness. Game changed.